Are you looking for a quick and easy project to make in time for 4th of July? Well, how about a patriotic flag pillow? Trust me, they're so quick and easy to make. You'll be able to whip one up in an afternoon and it will just look really neat to jazz up your decor for 4th of July. Now, these flags are actually exactly the same size as some flags we made for a quilt that I did about 4 or 5 years ago. So they'll actually make a nice set with that. Or of course, you could just make these stand alone. Now I'm going to give you all the fabric requirements and the cutting instructions. And I've also made a reference sheet up for you, and I'll put a link down below if you'd like to get a copy of that. Well, anyway, let's get on and make our pillow. This is what you're going to need to make the flag pillow cover. And then I'll tell you as we're making it what size each of the pieces are. I also have all that information over on my blog, as well as a free printable reference sheet for you. You can find the link for all that down in the description below. So we've got 2 red and 2 white that measure 2 inches by 10.5 inches. I've actually cut mine a little bit longer because once we've sewn them together, I'm going to trim them down to the right size. And then we've got 2 red and 1 white that measure 2 inches by 18.5 inches. Again, I've made those a little bit longer because then I can trim them down at the end. All I'm going to do now is sew the strips together. So we want to start with a red one, then a white one, red and white. Then we're going to do red again, start with red again, white and red. So I'm just going to sew them together, and when I've done that, I'll meet you back here. So I am sewing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I've got my stitch length on stitch length too, and I'm using wonderful confetti thread. And I did pin my strips, that's completely optional. So now we've got 2 sets. I'm just going to set the stitches. And then I'm just going to press the fabric towards the red so that we're not going to see it through the white. So just finger pressing so we don't have any creases there, and pressing. Now you could have done this as you sewed each strip together. I'm just in a bit of a hurry, and seeing as it's going to be a cushion, I don't think it really matters too much. So I'll just continue on doing this for both pieces. So I did just trim down this piece. Remember I said I cut my strips a little bit long, so I've trimmed this down so it measures 10.5 inches wide, and this long one so it measures 18.5 inches wide. Now we're going to take our blue piece that's 8.5 by 6.5 inches, and we're going to sew them together. I'm going to press the seams over to the blue, and then I'm going to sew on this bottom piece, and then we'll have completed our flag. As I come up to these seams, I'm just going to make sure they're being sewn down in the direction that they're pressed. I'll give that a quick press and then I'll sew the bottom piece on. So now I've finished sewing my flag together, and it measures 11 inches by 18.5 inches. Now you might have noticed that the fabric is different. I did carry on with this tutorial and I wasn't happy with the dimensions of it, so I've actually had to start again, and I didn't have the same fabric so that you would never know. So now you know I did make a boo-boo and we've got different fabric here, but I've done it exactly the same as I just showed you. It measures 11 inches by 18.5 inches, and now we're going to add our borders on. So we're going to take our 2 borders that measure 18.5 inches by 2.5 inches, and we'll sew one to the top and one to the bottom. And then we'll press the seams towards the red just as we have been, and then we'll take our 2 side pieces, and they measure 2.5 inches by 15 inches, and we'll sew them onto either side. So I'll do that and I'll meet you back here. I finished adding my borders, and now what I've done is I've sandwiched my pillow top with a piece of fabric for the backing that measures around 17 inches by 24 inches. I've got a bit of batting there, and then I've got my pillow top, and then what I did between each of the layers is I just sprayed a little bit of this quilt basting spray, which is my favorite basting spray right now. You could also just pin it in place if you wanted to. Now what we need to do is quilt it. And I'm just going to do a stitch in the ditch along all the lines, which will really help my flag pop, but you can quilt yours however you like. So I've finished quilting now, and it's hard to see, but if I flip it over, you can see the lines there where I've got my flag. What I'm going to do now is just trim off the excess. So I'm going to line my ruler up to the edge of my pillow top and just trim that batting and backing off. And I'll do this on all 4 sides. Now we're going to make our sleeves, and we're going to need 2 pieces that measure 15 inches by 15 inches. And what we're going to do is fold up the edge around 1/2 inch and press, and then another 1/2 inch and then press. Now you can do that by eye, but I've got this handy hot ruler by Clover. So what I do is just fold up my edge to a line that measures my 1/2 inch and then press. And I'll just make sure I press along the whole edge. And then I'll fold again, and I've already got that edge there to do around my 1/2 inch, and then press again. Now I will pop some pins in just to hold it in place, and I'll put them on this side because I'm going to sew down on that on our top. I'll do the same for my second piece. So on the top side, we've got the fold underneath. I'm going to stitch that down at about a stitch length 2.5, and I'm going to stitch with a seam allowance of just shy of 1/2 inch because that's the fold we did, and I just want to catch that fold that we did. So just going to sew along this whole edge, not worrying about a back stitch. Coming right off the edge, cutting my thread, and I'll repeat that for my second piece. So now we're going to place it so our pillow top is right side up and facing us, and then we're going to take one of our sleeves and place it right sides facing down. So we've got the nice smooth edge here facing down, and we've got the folds facing us. Then we're going to line it up on the top or the bottom and the top and the sides. And then once we're happy it's all lined up nicely, we'll just pop some pins in. And making sure you're going through all the layers. If you really wanted to, you could just do a stitch along the edge all the way around just to make sure all your layers are in place, but I'm not going to worry about that. I'll just pop a couple of pins in on this bottom edge. And then what I'm going to do is take my next piece, and again I'm facing that right sides down with the folds facing me, and then I'm going to line it up again on the sides, on all 3 sides, and then when I'm happy I'm going to pin that in place. And now I know that my 2 sleeves are on correctly. Now I can pin in the middle here, so I've got, you can see underneath here, one sleeve and this one is overlapping. I want them to just be sitting really nicely, and then when I'm happy they are, I'll pop a pin in. So just put in as many pins as you'd like to. The more the merrier, I say. Now we're going to sew all the way around our edge. So you really can start anywhere. I'm starting right before that first sleeve, which is underneath the top sleeve. I've lowered my stitch length down to 2, and I'm going to sew it with a generous 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'll just go forward. Now we're sewing through a few layers, so if you wanted to, you could always use your walking foot. I'm coming right over my sleeve here where it opens up, so we'll just do a back stitch so that's really nice and secure, and then carry on. Coming up to my corner, removing that pin. Now I'm going to do my best guess at stopping at 1/4 inch, making sure my needle is down and turning, and then I'm going to carry on. And now if you didn't want to guess, you could always take a washable marker and just mark where that 1/4 inch is. Actually, I think I need to go one more stitch. And then I'm going to carry on until I've sewn all 4 sides. Now we're just going to trim the excess off on all 4 corners. So I'm just going to go straight across like that, and just being extra careful not to cut my stitches. And I'll repeat that for all 4 corners. Then we're going to find our opening, grab onto a corner and push it through. I'm actually going to grab the other corner and push that through. Then I'm going to pop my hand in the other side of the opening and pop that corner through and the other corner, just so we can turn it right sides out. Then I'm just going to take my point turner and pop it in and work on these corners. I'm just going to gently push. Well, we can be quite firm, but not too firm, because we don't want to poke a hole, and just get that corner sitting really nicely. We do have quite a few layers, so it's never going to be a really sharp point. So don't be too harsh on the corners. Just get them so you're happy with them. And then once we've done this, we're going to give it a press and then do our final step. We're nearly done. So I've just rolled out all the edges and made sure it's sitting really nicely. Now, this is the step that a lot of people want to skip because they don't really see the point in it. But trust me, giving it a quick press now is really what helps it look really professional and just makes the end result just so much better. So don't skip this step. Pressing is just as important as any other step in the process, and actually one of my favorite parts. I feel like when you press, you really start to see your project come to life. So I'll do this on all 4 sides, and then I will just give the whole pillow a press because, well, I love pressing. Now what we're going to do is we're going to sew around the entire edge with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and that's just going to really finish off our pillow. So I'm just going to start down the bottom. I'm going to make my stitch length 3, I think. It's really a personal preference. 3 is nice and large, and I think that looks a little bit decorative. I've found my 1/2 inch mark on my foot plate, which I'm going to use as my guide. I'm not going to do a back stitch. I'll just do a back stitch at the very end when we come back to where we've started. So just stitching along. And now it is at this point that you might want to just mark your 1/2 inch from your edge so you don't have to guess when we get to that part. Okay, that looks about right to me. Now I can feel that I'm coming up to my sleeve underneath. I just want to make sure that that's going to be sitting nicely and being sewn down in how I intended it to be sitting. So you could have popped in a pin before we sewed, or just keep an eye on that as you come up to it. So coming up to where I started, just going past a few stitches, and then I will do a back stitch. Cutting my thread, and we're done. So there we have our pillow cover all finished. Isn't that looking super cute? So now what we need to do is just take our insert and pop it in one end. Then we're going to squish it down a bit and open up that sleeve and pop it in the other end. And then we just want the corners to be sitting nicely in the corners. Once you feel like it's sitting in there nicely, we can fix this back sleeve, make sure that's all sitting nicely. And there we have our cushion all ready for 4th of July. Okay, it's like camera trickery. So this is the original pillow that I made, and I actually ended up making it smaller. That's why I ended up redoing the whole tutorial. Silly me. Normally when I do a project, I actually make the sample first, but I was like, oh, I've made this pillow before because I've made one to give to a friend. I know what I'm doing. And I got the measurements all wrong, so I had to record it twice. So I've recorded this tutorial twice. Anyway, I hope you like the pillow. Don't forget that the flag here is exactly the same size as the flag quilt that we made a few years ago. And I'm going to put a link for that video up here if you'd like to check that out as well. Well, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.